Hey, good morning, everybody. It's another wacky Wednesday in Washington. Or is it a wonderful wacky Wednesday in Washington? I can't tell. It's day whatever it is in the Gilligan's Island case. I think 59. I'm not sure if yesterday counts. Just after getting off the air with you all, I read a note from the court, and that is there'd be no jury yesterday. One of the jurors was ill, and one of the defendants was not transported from his holding facility because he had pink eye. And I'm thinking, pink eye? I mean, you're not going to come to court for that. You're going to tie up court. Well, DOC protocols require that a person with pink eye be isolated for 48 hours. So they might not bring him in today either. So we're all in court, a dozen lawyers, court staff, and we get in touch with the client. He doesn't think he has pink eye at all. He wants to see a physician. He's demanded to see a physician. And the judge, with the classic quip of the day, says, "This may be the first time in American history we've had a second opinion on pink eye." That sort of summarizes the day, So we went through some moves and sculpted what the next couple of days will look like. But, it was a bump in the road that I didn't really need. I don't think any of us did. We're trying to finish this case. Defense witnesses still to come. Today, a confidential human source will testify under pseudonym to protect his or her identity. They're in response to our subpoena, and so the jury will begin to see a little bit, and they may not see much more of the secret world of informants and the FBI's use of them against domestic groups. So that's what I'm looking forward to today. And if you're keeping an eye on the case, that's what you can expect. I had some downtime yesterday, and with that downtime,
Society wants to know, can you get pink eye if someone farts on the pillow?
Well, having engaged in flatulence in many forms, in many locations, I don't think I've ever farted on a pillow and then stuffed my face in it. I'd like to know why you're asking that question.
Fair.
Is there something we need to know? Here at Law and Legitimacy, we appeal to people of all types, including people with odd practices. But anyhow, so I think I've mentioned to you before that I like the Lex Fridman podcast. I think he's a pretty thoughtful guy. I started listening to him during the pandemic and learned. And I was drawn to him because he's an AI researcher and an MIT scholar, now an entrepreneur in Austin. His podcast has gone beyond AI, and he now is a sort of thinking man's Joe Rogan. I don't know that you can be a thinking man's Joe Rogan, but he's thoughtful. So he had on, and he does long interviews. His interviews are typically 2 to 3 hours long. So he did an interview with Sam Altman of OpenAI in a discussion of artificial intelligence and GPT-4. And I don't know, Mike, I passed it on to you. I was disappointed in it. I thought that here we are on the cusp of an exciting new future, and these guys just weren't up to it.
No, and characteristic of Lex Fridman to be sort of, vanilla, sort of bland in his tone, right? I think that's his trademark, is to not be excitable about certain issues.
Yeah, here's Lex Fridman being held up on a street corner in Manhattan by two men with a gun.
Oh no!
I can see, I can see that you want something from me. That gun appears to be an apparent act of hostility, but a world filled with love is so much better. When you're holding that gun, does it occur to you that there might be a better way of getting what you want? Bam, bam, bam!
That's right. Well, and sometimes that's okay, but I don't know. Lex Fridman makes podcasts for those that need sleep aids and for those that maybe don't mind the monotony of his tone. No doubt, I think he at least avows himself as a mathematician, and I don't pretend to challenge any of his credentials. But I haven't made it all the way through the podcast. I told you I'm about halfway through, and I tried to short circuit the substance of the podcast with some reviews online, just trying to get a sense of what people were talking about. But my big takeaway from the half that I have consumed is that, where is the beef, right? I'm just bored to tears because, like you said, there are pretty bright line questions that should be asked and answered, especially with OpenAI dominating headlines in recent months with the release of GPT-4 and ChatGPT's new engine underlying that. Microsoft's commitment to invest billions in what is known as a capped profit company now, in OpenAI, previously regarded as a nonprofit. We've got all sorts of layoffs around big tech. You can look at Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all each laying off tens of thousands of employees. And in the case of Microsoft and Facebook in particular, commensurate investments in artificial intelligence, right? So there are big questions about the future of not only American society, but I think humanity and the existential fulfillment that we all so desperately seek, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And the two of them just seem to prattle
Well,
about
I don't want to
minutia.
be. I mean, and I mean, all this by saying, folks, you really had to listen to this. I mean, and even if you're not sleepy, I mean, I do think that Friedman is a place to go to see what kind of thinking is going on at the frontier of AI, artificial intelligence, as it engages with general society. I just was disappointed at the lack of asking certain questions. So, against the possibility that Altman or Friedman might find a copy of this, I have an open challenge to these guys. Read St. Augustine's Confessions. Artificial intelligence researchers talk about artificial general intelligence as opposed to task-oriented intelligence. A machine can be taught to pick up an item and put it on a conveyor belt at a certain rhythm, and it'll do that as long as there's an energy supply and the machine's parts are in working order. It won't need a coffee break. It won't be, the machine next to it won't catch his eye. It won't start flirting on company time. And so they present great efficiencies. The idea of artificial general intelligence is a machine that can learn on its own and do things that it's not been programmed to do. And in the context of machine learning, we have the ability of machines with vast computing power teaching themselves how to perform things that we don't, that we and produce outcomes, and we don't know how the machines are performing these outcomes. So it begins to look a little bit like a human being. I mean, Mike and I talk. He tells me how he's married. I have no idea how his wife would be attracted to him, but yet I know, the human stain is such that these things happen, and we know that machines do things that we don't fully understand. Henry Kissinger and others have just written a book on AI and the future of society, in which they say, there's some fundamental change in our thinking that will take place as a society because the Enlightenment promised us that we could break down the world, understand it, and master it, and therefore be happier. In the age of artificial intelligence, what we're learning is that we can produce things, that we can have outcomes, but we don't understand. And we can produce the machines that generate the outcomes, but we don't understand how the outcomes are reached. So it's a fundamental mark on a jumping point, a fundamental transformation of society. Much like we had an industrial revolution, we're now in an information revolution or an artificial intelligence revolution. And so, as Altman and Friedman are talking about this, they talk about the problem of alignment. And they're using jargon, and it took me a while to understand what they're talking about. And that is, how do we assure that AI, when we ask it to perform a function, will perform it in a way that aligns or is consistent with our values and our goals? And that's a huge problem, because the concern is that if we get machines, we get thinking things that can develop their own abilities, their own capacities. We might also come to the point not just of artificial general intelligence, but artificial super intelligence. And that there'll come a time, perhaps some sunny Saturday morning, where HAL, the combined collective intelligence of the machines, will suddenly say, wait a minute, there's a better way to live than the way we live on Earth. And they may make decisions that are or are not consistent with human flourishing. And so the problem of alignment at the grand level is the evil genius problem that some people think of with respect to AI. What are we going to do if the machines decide that there's a better world than one subject to human mastery. What are they going to do? What are the machines going to do if they develop the ability to conceive of goals for themselves that are inconsistent with us? And so, there we go. And you get an intimation of this with the algorithmic censorship involved in Chat GPT. And so the example that Altman and Friedman consider is, if you ask Chat GPT-4, um, what's the most number of people I can kill with $1 investment, the machine will not answer that, because some programmers have decided that that doesn't align with human values. And there are a whole series of questions that people have explored with GPT about questions it won't answer because it's inconsistent with someone's view of the human good. Well, what are we creating a universe in which machines can ultimately transgress these boundaries, in which machines can take control? And if we are, what steps can be taken to assure that we remain in control of the technology? And then this is the fundamental question that they didn't really grapple with, as far as I was concerned. Who decides who decides? Who decides who gets to control the machines? And as I listened to them, I thought, my goodness, all this sophisticated technology, centuries, millennia later, and we're just right back where we were in chapter 3 of Aristotle's Politics, asking ourselves, what makes a good citizen? And in chapter 3 of Aristotle's Politics, he said, you know, he talked about citizenship, and citizenship is the capacity to deliberate. And in a good society, he didn't use those terms. The optimization of citizenship for those capable of citizenship is the task of lawmakers and the task of the citizenry. And so, in Athenian democracy, those capable of deliberating were citizens. They met in the ecclesia, or assemblies, to decide the grander issues of the day. They didn't always get it right, but that was who decided who decided. Citizens did. And in the world of AI, we have the potential to live in an opaque universe where distant corporations or engineers, or those who control the corporations and engineers, set sort of hidden parameters for what is and is not consistent with human society, human flourishing, and they get to set our goals for us. But this is where and I'm sorry, Mike, to go on this long monologue.
No, it's great.
This is where I got really, really frustrated with Friedman and Altman, and where I just don't understand the AI discussion. Artificial intelligence and the quest to develop, to replicate human experience in a machine form is based on an assumption that all that we are is a function of our complexity. And if all that we are is a function of our complexity, and that complexity can be replicated, then we can create machines that are what we are, that are conscious, that have the ability to get by in the world, and that struggle with that. Most AI researchers fail to account for some fundamental truths that I observe in myself and everybody but Mike's wife, who is perfect, and that is the reality of sin. Say what you want about St. Augustine, but what he introduced into the Western vocabulary was the notion of original sin. That somehow within every breast, within every chest, within every person, there is a sense of wanting to do right, but a sense of failing to do right as a result of our own devices. And the notion of sin is that of transgressing boundaries, that there is a right way, a righteous way, an appropriate way to be human. And there is an inappropriate way to be human, and that the consequences of sin diminishes our capacity for human flourishing. And we all, at least used to in our society and culture, recognize it. I don't see this discussion in AI. And when people imagine super intelligence, imagine artificial general intelligence, I don't hear them saying, is a computer going to wake up one day and say, I'll only find my rest when I find my rest in thee, as Augustine says, of God, in the first page of the Confessions. And so I don't have access to Chat GPT-4. I guess I should acquire it. And I'd like to ask it, what is your faith? What do you believe in the future? What provides you with hope? What provides you with a sense of charity? What provides you with a sense of love? And I don't I and I don't know what ChatGPT will say. Will it masquerade as a thinking thing by providing me with a 300-page essay on some say, others say, this say? Until the machine can say, I've read the others, but this is what I say. This is my longing. This is my fear. This is my sense of terror in the face of an uncertain future. And this is what I hope for. I don't think we're going to have artificial superintelligence. And I wonder, and I may be kidding myself here, but I wonder whether humankind is more than mere complexity. And so, as a matter of faith, I embrace certain theological perspectives that we're created in the image of God, and that as God created the universe ex nihilo, out of nothing, according to theologians, the mystery of being, the grand answer to the one question that no one can ever really answer except as a matter of faith: why is there a world rather than not? I wonder whether ChatGPT can even experience human uncertainty, can experience longing. And so, what would
Well,
what would a
Norm,
computer
you
what would a
just to
computer that experienced longing do? What would it look like? You know?
Yeah, well, just to make this a little more edgy, because you've been public about this, but can a computer, would artificial intelligence contemplate suicide?
Right.
And if so, what would that mean?
So Freud talks about the desire for death. And I'm not going to pretend to understand it. But I think that anybody who stood next to the Niagara Falls or a raging river knows what that is. There's some instinct to jump in that you have to pull yourself from. And would a computer feel that? And what is that instinct, if not perhaps a desire to eliminate the terror of uncertainty and cut to the chase, to get to the finish line before you're finished by forces seen and unseen? We have a tremendous number of people who decide that they've had enough of life, and that's a choice that humans make. Would a machine kill itself? I wrote a playful essay years ago. There was an automated device, I think at Rockefeller Center in New York, that gave out parking tickets to cars, and it ran itself into a pond in
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
center of a plaza. And I thought, wow, machines really are becoming human. This thing realized that there was no point to it all and decided to short circuit itself. I suspect it was just a short circuit. So I don't, I obviously we never get the chance to ask the suicides why they did it. We all struggle with our darker moments and can imagine those moments, I suspect, going to extremes and develop some sort of empathetic understanding of what must have led them to do what they do. But I'm not aware of machines doing so.
Well, I think I asked that question, or I bring up, your example, because I love that blog post, by the way, Norm. And anybody who, I think you can probably find that on normpattis.com, or I don't pattisblog.com. I think that's one of the more moving pieces you've ever written, because it really got me to think about artificial intelligence in a different way. I love the example of just a little parking robot,
I've had it. I can't do this anymore.
making his way down the street, and he just has an existential crisis where he's like, it's over, it's meaningless, and then just jumps into a pond. But I think that the fact that you're not reading articles, I'm not reading articles, I'm not seeing descriptions of discussions about this, and it makes me believe that this preoccupation or infatuation, if you will, of American society right now with the notion of artificial intelligence, and you know adding chat gpt to the lexicon, is a pretty pessimistic outlook. It sort of emerges from a larger darkness that has blanketed us as a population, as a collective here in America, because it is sort of seeking answers to questions that we, for I guess the last several years, have been unable to answer. You and I talk a lot about the growing divisions within America, the increasing polarization. Scott Adams refers to this as two movies, one screen, and all I can see is that there are billions of dollars being invested into the development of artificial intelligence. And you've got Sam Altman, who comes on the Lex Fridman podcast, and one of the first things that he says, I'm paraphrasing, is that we will look back at ChatGPT or GPT-4 as a clunky, clumsy version of artificial intelligence. And I am just moved a little bit to irritation, Norm, on that point, because we are at the same time, the broader context of this is that the fabric of our economic reality, our social reality, our geopolitical reality, that fabric is being stretched and torn in just about every direction. And then you've got someone like Sam Altman, and then someone as prominent and as influential as Lex Fridman getting in the, just sort of hanging out in the weeds of the mechanics of AI, rather than talking about what all of this means. Why is it that the upper crusts of American society have begun pushing so many resources into something that is as opaque and misunderstood as artificial intelligence, right? We don't even speak from a baseline of what human intelligence actually is, Norm. What the mechanics or the combinations of things that we regard as human intelligence, and why humans would want to build something that lives outside of ourselves that could replicate that complexity. Why is it that we are doing that, Norm?
Well, I don't know that we even understand ourselves. I mean, I've
I
even
agree. I agree. I can't tell you who I am other than who I am right now, March 29th, 2023, and who I historically have been. But I can't really tell you with any sense of certainty who I will be a year from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now.
well, I think the thing that strikes a bad note in my mind, my psyche, my heart, my soul, whatever it is, this thinking thing that I inhabit, about the AI discussion is how heedless of the past it is. As I listened to Friedman and Altman, I really did think it's time for them to read Aristotle. As I listened to them to discuss whether AI could replicate human experience, I never heard them talk about longing. And longing, I mean, and we see Vivek Ramaswamy in his attempt to garner support for a Republican nomination as president, talk about longing for meaning. And I think that there's a lot to that. And I don't know that that's merely a function of human complexity. I mean, as animals go, as beings with consciousness inhabiting the earth go, we are uniquely creative and uniquely destructive. And as you point out, Mike, uniquely self-destructive.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't view that as a simple matter of complexity. As I view my experience and human experience, I think that a sense of transcendence, a sense of being beckoned to something beyond ourselves, a sense of grace, of accepting limitations within the world and understanding that the ability to overcome them is a gift we're given rather than something we will into creation. These strike me as akin to Christian virtues, and also resembling Aristotle's discussion of moderation in the ethics. And AI is a uniquely two-dimensional universe where things are broken into ones and zeros, and a digital presentation of things can crunch data, massive amounts of data, more than a human mind, apparently at this point, perhaps can digest in an instant. And so, what's it going to create? Is
Yeah,
it going to
that was going to be my question. To what cognizable end, right? It seems like you and I are sitting here having, and I guess I'll stop there and ask: are you familiar with the concept of 0 day?
I no, I'm not.
So in the cloud says 0 day, and I asked in the cloud to say more. And in the cloud says 0 day is a cyber attack. It's an unknown threat lying in wait, hence the phrase 0 day. So I imagine
Okay.
suicide contemplation for AI would look like a 0 day attack. Not 0 days that it existed, but 0 days that it was known. It can exist and be undetected and unknown. And so now I'm going sort of, my mind is reeling a bit because it seems as though the development of artificial intelligence is bifurcated. On one hand, it is something that uh, reveals a certain, I guess, recognition of our own um, limitations, like you were just talking about, right? Our own insufficient means as people. But then on the other hand, because we can't easily answer what problems AI is designed to solve. Because right now, all I can tell is that it's taking human language, it's breaking it into ones and zeros, attempting to create, recognize patterns, to create predictive answers, short circuiting the need to write longer essays and do research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at least on the surface. But it's sort of collectivizing language, right?
Well,
It's sort of unifying humans around, I guess, what the data points are. I guess the fattest part of that bell curve, right?
I get that. That's okay with me because I think that it as a augmentation device, as a device that makes it possible to achieve our ends more efficiently, it has potential, but it also has a terrifying potential because I've said before, and I'll say it again: what if the maximum utility, yeah, for the greatest number of people, the utilitarian goal? What if a maximum sense of a good life for the greatest number could be achieved at something less than full employment? um, you know, um,
Well, and
um,
that's a really relevant discussion to this. So please.
and so that we might have a surplus population. I mean, the thought occurs to me from time to time that the opioid epidemic, it might not be might be a larger systemic problem. That as we have an ever more increasingly and distant economy capable of producing satisfaction, a sense of safety for an increasingly larger percentage of the world's population, we have what Dickens once referred to, I think, in the Christmas Carol, as a surplus population, people who don't fit. And I even began to wonder about this with respect to mass shootings. We haven't talked about the shooting at the school in Nashville this week, but I
Sure.
saw a startling statistic this week in the newspaper that thus far in 2023 we've had 85 school shootings in the United States. Now, they're not all mass shootings. Only 75 people have died, and I mean, consider the world we live in. Only 75 people have been shot to death in schools this year. Wow. But I mean, by contrast to the number of shootings, that suggests, that something. And so so I was talking about this with one of the lawyers in the case. Why didn't we have mass shootings 30 years in the Biggs case in our downtime?
Many people are beginning to ask this question,
And
Norm.
so, what is it about our society? And what I think it might be is a general sense of despair, a general sense of a lack of efficacy in their own communities, and a general sense of efficacy in their own bodies, as it were. As people come to find that they can't find a place where they fit, they're longing, and this is what the AI discussion lacks. Their longing for a sense of significance is going unmet, and despair yields fear, and fear yields rage, and rage yields homicide and suicide. And so it seems to me that this is a less a function of guns and gun violence, although guns are the quick means of doing this, than it is a reflection of a society gone wrong, where we are loving, the very definition of sin from Augustine, love of the wrong thing. We've come to place a greater emphasis on ease, efficiency, and comfort, than on a sense of significance. And I think in the end, most people can be seduced into giving up a sense of significance, their liberty, their freedom, for safety. But if you take that gamble seriously, I think you end with extinguishing the human spirit. And we're not machines. We are created in the image of God. I mean, to me, the discussion of AI ultimately becomes a theological discussion, because when you can create a machine that says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" and cries that out in despair, then you will have created a human being. But is it possible that in spite of our best efforts, we'll never be able to create us because we're created by a power greater than us? Right now, that's the line I stand on.
Well, I can't. My mind here is going in a million different directions. I'm thinking about CBDCs. We
Mhm.
mentioned that briefly yesterday, and knowing that Sam Altman is a supporter of UBI, was a quite
Universal
a
basic income. So,
yep,
yeah.
quite a big contributor to the Biden campaign.
In fact, he announces later in that podcast that OpenAI is doing a study on UBI, and it'll be published toward the end of the year. And that seems to me tipping
Well,
his hand.
Well,
We
yeah,
rec-
because those two things are at odds. In the beginning of the podcast, he talks about publishing GPT-4 so that the public can be involved and can see what's going on and can become comfortable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems as though he's predicted a certain outcome years into the future, and it yields, in my opinion, the conclusion that ChatGPT and GPT-4 in its current iteration is little more than a data pool for them to pull research from the field and inject that back into whatever engines are in the background that have not been published. But for whatever reason, we're not talking about the fact that he is a staunch supporter of UBI and is also the leading figure. He is the most visible figure in the artificial intelligence sphere right now. Those two things are not disconnected.
So, yeah, we got to get. I mean, we'll never get Altman on our for the long form. But I mean, Altman is unreachable to the likes of we mere mortals because he's living amid the enclaves of the elite who control the algorithms, who define the common sense of good, and who dole out UBI or universal basic income to try to buy off those who are unnecessary in the face of despair. And we're left with Aristotle.
And his
we're
speech
left
patterns
with,
reflect that, right?
yeah.
His speech patterns made me think that almost exclusively. I was nearly unable to understand or to condense what he was saying in real time because I could not get over sort of the particularities of speech, his intonations, his inflections, very reminiscent of that very Silicon Valley-esque sort of, I guess, detached sphere of people that we've been referring to for the last several years.
Well, all right. Well, there we go. We've talked our way through another half an hour of your life, and we did so without the benefit of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Or so we think.
Yes. And one of the things, Mike, I want to figure out. I'd like to help me figure out how to get access to ChatGPT-4. I'd like to play with it and see whether I'm being fair. See if I can have my soul be co-opted by the great digitopia to come.
Absolutely. I think there's plenty of people here in the chat who can help us do that. In the cloud,
Right.
you seem to fit the bill. So help us figure out how to get Norm on ChatGPT and experiment a little bit.
All right, folks, we'll come back tomorrow. Mike, tell everybody how they can find us and support us, and we'll be back trying to make America think again before a machine does your thinking for you. I don't want that thinking, stinking machine thinking for me.
Yeah, that's right. Put a thumbs up on this video, please. As always, we are enjoying back to back 1,000 views on each stream. So we are growing, and to that end, the more support we can glean from you, the better. Locals is a place you can find us, lawandlegitimacy.locals.com. You can find us here on Rumble every morning, Twitter Live, YouTube Live, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts are found. But most importantly, you can find us on Locals. We're going to get Norm more in the realm of artificial intelligence. I would like him to perhaps verbalize his thoughts on St. Augustine and artificial intelligence, which exists right now on pattisblog.com for those of you that want to do some digging and some due diligence. But otherwise, we're here every morning, 7:45 a.m. And Norm, go get him in court today.
Well, let me warm up for a minute. Objection!
Excuse me, counselor, did you say something?
No. I didn't. I'm scared.
Overruled anyway.
Mike. All right.
Bye, Norm.